3, welcome back to maths. Now then, last week you did lots of work on tenths and we're going to carry on that for the first part of this week, and we're also going to be looking at how you represent a tenth as a decimal, which hopefully is going to be new learning for lots of you. So I've got a couple of pictures here just to recap your understanding of tenths first of all. Here I have got a rectangle, and I have said that this rectangle there represents one whole. And then what I've got beneath here is the same rectangle, but I have divided it into 10 equal parts. Now the whole rectangle, you can see, is the same size as this first one. So altogether it still stands for one whole, but the 10 equal parts, each one of those is a fraction of the whole. And I've got down here, each individual part we say is 1/10, which hopefully you recognise that vocabulary and that fraction from last week. And altogether, the one whole we can also say is 10/10. And again, hopefully that is familiar to you from last week, and you're going to need that information for what we're going to do next. There we go. So, what I have done now to this rectangle, you can see one part of it has been shaded in blue. So we would say that 1/10 of the rectangle is now blue. As well as showing that as a fraction, we can also show it as a decimal. Now, we've looked at decimals a little bit when we were working with money. So when you see a decimal number there, that is what they look like, okay? They have got a decimal point somewhere in them, and you should recognise that from our work earlier this year on money. So, 1/10 as a fraction, as a decimal, we would write it as 0.1. And this is the reason why we do that. So this decimal here, 0.1, the number before the decimal point tells us that there are no whole numbers shown by the little blue section here. The whole would be the entire rectangle, and the whole rectangle isn't shaded in blue, just a part of it is. So this 0 refers to the fact that there are no whole numbers represented. You then have the decimal point in the middle, and the number that comes after the decimal, in this case 1, this number shows us how many fractions of the whole are being shown, in this case with blue. And we can see just one section is being represented in blue, and that is why the number after the decimal point is 1, because we have 1/10 of the rectangle shaded in blue. I'm just going to show you some more examples of the exact same concept, just so you can start to repeat the information and the knowledge in your mind. Okay? In this example, you can see I've got 3 parts of the rectangle that have been shaded in blue. It doesn't matter which 3 parts you choose. They don't have to be the 3 parts that are next to each other. You can see I've just chosen 3 different parts that are separated out. Because we know already each part is the same size, it doesn't matter which ones you choose. So in this example, 3 parts of the rectangle have been shaded in blue. So as a fraction, we would say 3/10 of the rectangle is blue. As a decimal number, we would say 0.3 of the rectangle has been shaded in blue. And again, the reason why we do that is we still have our 0 at the front of the decimal number because the whole rectangle has not been shaded blue. We have a 3 after the decimal point because in this example, 3 of the 10 parts, 3/10, have been shaded in blue. So that's why we have 3 after the decimal point in this number. So 0.3 of that rectangle has been shaded in blue. Got one more example for you. This time I have shaded in 5 parts of the rectangle in blue. So we would say that 5/10, let me just go back. We would say that 5/10 as a fraction of the rectangle is blue. We can show this with the decimal 0.5. And then moving down here, we've got the same example. Still, we have not the whole shape shaded in blue. We only have 5 of the parts, 5/10, and that is why we have got a 5 after the decimal point. Hopefully, that is clear. If it's not, you can go back and re-watch that part of the video. Now, this is a number line that we saw yesterday. Not yesterday, probably last week. Recently, hopefully, you remember seeing this number line.
In the last video.
Oh, thank you, Miss Harden. Yes, in the last video, there we go. We saw this number line. And you can see it has 0 at the start, and it goes all the way up to 1 at the end. And in the last video, I showed you that the number line has been divided into 10 equal parts, and then we showed each one of those 10 parts as a fraction. You can see we go from 1/10 all the way up to 10/10, which is 1 whole. But this time I have changed what is above the line here. I've changed it from words to decimals. So you can see 1/10 as a decimal is 0.1, and the same pattern occurs all the way along the number line until you get to 10/10 over here. So 2/10, 0.2, 6/10, 0.6, etc. all the way along. When you get, let's go this side, when you get to 1 whole, which is 10/10, we have a slight change to our decimal number. You can see here, it is now 1.0. This is because now we do have the whole number represented. So the number before the decimal point tells us that if we have 10/10, we have 1 whole. So we have 1 whole number, then the decimal point, and in this case, we have nothing after the 1 whole, which is why we have 0/10. This last section is a little bit confusing perhaps at this moment in time. Don't worry, it won't be as we go through, but for now, if this is a bit too far perhaps, don't worry, I'm just showing it to you now because we will need to have this knowledge later. Okay? So, what I'm going to do now is show you some examples of the questions that we've put in our home learning on the website for you today. So this is an example of the first type of question, and in this case it asks us to match the fractions to the correct decimal. Okay, so there are 3 on this side and they need to match with 3 on this side. Now, one thing you might notice first of all is that the information here is shown in lots of different ways. We have words, we have fractions, and we have decimal numbers over here. And the first thing I would do to make it easier for yourself, you can see on this side of the board, all the numbers are represented in decimals. It's the same kind of representation. On this side here, you've got words and fractions. It's probably going to be easier to change these worded examples into fractions as well. So, what I can do is have a look at 8/10. I know to write that like this. And then 3/10. I know to write it like that. Hopefully, once you have got the numbers written in the same representation, we can see how to match them up. I have put this number line down here to help you if you are struggling a little bit. So if I want to match up 8/10 with its decimal, I could look down here for 8/10 and I can go above and I can see 0.8. 6/10, again, use the number line if you need to and look up, you can see 0.6. 3/10, use the number line, looking up 0.3. Hopefully, you're starting to spot that there is a pattern emerging. So the numerator, 8, 6, and 3, the numerator in each of those fractions is the same number that appears after the decimal point in each of the decimal numbers. And that's a pattern that's going to really help you if you can spot it when doing this kind of question. Now then, I've got another question here to show you. This one says, use the image to complete the fraction and the decimal. Before we can do that, we need to understand what the image is showing us. So we have got a grid here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sections in the grid. So the 10 is going to be my denominator. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 of the sections in the grid have a counter in them. Okay, so down here you can see I've already got my denominator because there are 10 sections to the grid in total. 4 of them have a counter in them. So 4/10 of the image have got a counter in them. And then if you remember back to the last question that we looked at, there's a connection between the number that is the numerator and the number that comes after the decimal point. So because there are 4/10 as a fraction, the decimal is 0.4. If you're not too sure about that, you can go back and look at the number line and hopefully you'll be able to see the pattern there a little bit more clearly. Right, I have got 2 more to show you. This is the next one, a lovely true or false question. The arrow shows 0.7. Is that true or false? So we have our number line from 0 all the way up to the number 1. You can see some of the lines have got a decimal number already, showing how far along the line we are. And there are some other lines that are empty, and the blue arrow is pointing to one of those empty lines. So what I would do to answer this question is to fill in what is missing from the little black lines. So 0 and then 0.2. What comes in between 0 and 2? The number 1. So this one here would be 0.1, and you would go along in that pattern. So 0.2, you would then have 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 and 0.9 before you get to 1. So the arrow shows 0.7. Is that true or false? It is true in that situation. One more question. A part-whole model. We love these part-whole models. So, as you know, we are trying to make this top amount, in which case 0.9, and these 2 sections here need to be added together to make 0.9. We already have 0.2, so what do we need to make 0.9? two ways you can do this. To be honest, one of the easiest ways to do in this kind of situation is just think about the numbers that come after the decimal point. In this case, 9 and 2. And you can do the calculation in a couple of ways. So you could have your 9 at the beginning, and then you could take away the 2, and what does that leave you with? Or you could have your number 2 at the beginning of the calculation, and you would say, what do I add to 2 to make 9? Okay? The answer to both those calculations is 7. We've got to remember we can't just write 7 in that box there because we're working in decimals. So the last digit would be 7. We would need to remember to have our 0 before the decimal point so that this number is decimal like the other two numbers we've been given already. Okay. Right, so hopefully that has helped you when you come to today's work on the website. If any of it has been a bit confusing, then go back and watch a section again. Monday's work and Tuesday's work is going to be about this sort of work, showing tenths as decimals. So hopefully after 2 days you will feel very confident with it, and I'll be back on Wednesday with our next video.